What's up, everybody? My name is Lee Shaner, and you're tuned into You Feel Me. What's up, everybody? My name is Lee. Some of you guys might know me as Intuition, and you are tuned into You Feel Me, the Skullcandy podcast, where we talk to artists and musicians about life and culture. And I'm sitting with Nick Waterhouse. How did you become a record store nerd?
Well, I'm not. I think a lot of people consider me to be one. I worked in a Virgin Megastore starting when I was 15, just because I was like really, really passionate about, like, I wanted to figure this shit out, you know? If I liked something, I was always reading, like, it's really boring to grow up and just be like, man, Stevie Ray Vaughan is the greatest guitar player of all time.
Because that's what you hear on 95.9.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an example. I think I grew up like hearing like British guys and like rock and rollers, and then my mom was playing a lot of blues, and I was like, well, some of this sounds familiar. So I would read, and it'd be like Pete Townsend being like, well, all I did was hang out and smoke weed at art school in 1963 and listen to Big Bill Broonzy. So I'd be like, well, what's that sound like?
Right, so instead of listening to Pete Townsend, go find Big Bill Broonzy.
Totally. Yeah.
That's funny. That's kind of how I treated rap music as a kid, where I was like, oh, these samples are amazing. Like, where did they come from? And then you find out about all this soul music. But you were doing that with rock and blues.
Yeah.
And that shows in your music a lot.
Definitely. And what's funny is that I was aware of the sampling thing, and I ended up getting exposed to so much hip-hop through the songs that I liked that got sampled. And while I was a teenager working at the Virgin Megastore, I worked with this dude named Austin Becker, who was like the bad kid from Philly who had to move to California because he did some stuff.
In West Philadelphia, born and raised.
Dude, yes. And he was...
Fresh Prince?
Yeah. He was the fresh Italian American prince who had notches cut in his eyebrows in the mid 90s, and he was like a hip hop DJ, and so he would be playing tons of like what I guess, especially in Orange County, would be considered like underground stuff. Which, again, it's like much later in my life getting plugged into like the world of being on Innovative Leisure, which was related to Stone Throw. Like he was the first dude who played Madlib or played. You know, the MF Doom record repeatedly.
Yeah.
And was playing tons of like Talib Kweli and then I never had a hip hop education before I worked with somebody who was like so deeply into it.
So that's where you grew up, is in Orange County?
Yes.
And that's where you worked at the Virgin Megastore?
Yeah, I was born in Santa Ana.
Okay.
I grew up in Huntington Beach on the border of Costa Mesa. Costa Mesa was like where I worked. It's also where I like played a bunch of my shows when I was a teenager and made my records, which was later I made my first album there.
Living in Southern California for a while, I envision Orange County, Santa Ana, Costa Mesa, very like bro jock places, like extreme sports, motocross, stuff like that. Am I far off?
You're not, but it's like
were you a fish out of water?
Oh, yeah, I was a fish out of water.
Yeah.
But I did all that stuff. I grew up racing motocross.
No shit.
Like, well, my dad was a fireman.
Yeah.
The big thing that, like, rightfully so, there's a strong association with Orange County as being, like, culturally conservative. It was, like, the birthplace of, like, Nixon and John Birch Society, like...
And McDonald's.
But on the other end of it, like it was always a deeply. It's kind of like the way people think of Texas, where like people are like, "Oh, Houston, like big belt buckles and cowboy hats and oil money," but it's like Houston's the most diverse population. So the demographics of, say, my class I was in from kindergarten to high school was like 50% Asian and Hispanic, and that's the reality that I knew of Orange County, which was kind of like a post-Reagan world. I didn't really grow up in the affluent part. There was a lot of bro culture. Yeah. A lot of the bro culture is around sports. But it's kind of weird. It's like, especially because Huntington Beach, my mom worked in L.A., so like we still felt like an L.A. family. So she was like commuting to L.A.
Okay.
And other people I know that grew up in Orange County never went to L.A. And maybe their parents were like born again Christians or like I wasn't in this weird fundamentalist family, and I was also exposed to a lot of other cultures just because, like, my dad was a fireman in Anaheim, so like a lot of the people I was around were not just like bro-y OC type people.
But like fireman, your dad's like a man's man or what?
Oh yeah, he was from Michigan.
Yeah,
he grew up outside Detroit. My grandpa was like a Ford guy, like factory mechanic dude.
How'd he end up out here?
The Korean War.
Oh, yeah.
Both of my parents came out with military, like low-level military guys, not like officers, who came out because of the Korean War, and they were like, this place is nice and it's cheap. And my mom was from like outside of Chicago. So both of my folks were kind of in the first generation to live in Fountain Valley and Huntington Beach. And
my grandfather was in the Korean War too.
Mm-hmm.
The Korean War is like completely forgotten about in American history books. Like I didn't even know what it was about in going to school. I had to like look it up on Wikipedia and shit.
I was really, really fascinated by it in elementary school.
Yeah.
I would like go to the library and look it up. I think it's because it was our first like shameful non-victory.
Right.
You know?
And then followed it right up with Vietnam. It was like two right in a row.
It was like the prequel to Vietnam.
Yeah.
But it brought, like, I like, as a native son of California, I'm really fascinated with the fact that, like, we were, like, a boom time state, especially Southern California. Like, most of the migrations here, also, like, the black migration, which created a lot of, like, the strains of, like, rhythm and blues and pop music and soul that we know happened because of World War II. Mm-hmm. It was, like, people had to come work in factories or they were serving. And they would come out here, and it was like, I'm not going back to Texas, Louisiana,
the South, right?
So yeah, my dad was like, he's an intelligent man. He's like very street smart.
Yeah.
But he was a surfer and a motorcycle racer, and he was like all those guys have like a death wish. Like that's what I forget when I talk to friends as I get older. I'm like, oh right, yeah, all the male figures in my life were like, yeah, jump off this cliff, kid.
Yeah.
Like,
you do gnarly shit because it's like life is too boring.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't like, I haven't thought hard about it until a couple years of like being outside of that. But that type of like lifestyle, I think, is tied to the fact that like that was a dangerous job. So for fun, you do sort of dangerous stuff. Mm-hmm. It was like a thrill-seeking culture. But the flip of it was like, I think my dad's like man's man world of maybe the 70s and 80s was a little less reprehensible in terms of like, when I was a kid in the 90s, people who did motocross and all that stuff were just like, they were trash, man. Mm-hmm. They were all just like assholes, and it was, yeah.
Shots fired at the motocross, we'd always think.
Jeremy McGrath, I'm coming for you, bro.
Was he an avid music listener, though?
Yeah, but he was like a music listener. I love my dad. Like, my dad actually, he influenced me so much because he's not a critical music listener.
Right.
And also, like, all the Fire Guy culture was just like, it was one step above like bar band stuff. But, you know, my dad also grew up in the Southern California like punk scene.
Yeah, that's tight.
And it's amazing to talk to him. Like, I have friends that are like, yeah, you were at the Cuckoo's Nest and so you saw the germs, and he's just like, yeah, I think so. I don't know. Like, like to him, he's like an adult who's just like, you want to know something about my life when I was 19? Like, I don't remember what I ate for lunch that day.
Right, exactly.
But he was around. There was this band called The Crowd, which was like a big SoCal hardcore band. Yeah. They were all in high school with him. I got the impression he was just taking it all in, but he also loved. I just remember as a kid, he was like, "Oh, you're interested in guitar?" Like, the cool guys, when I was a freshman in high school in 1972, they all learned Crosby, Stills, and Nash licks and stuff. But he really like he turned me on to like the Kinks and like the Ramones. And when I was 5, he gave me all his cassettes with it was just punk stuff. And
that's tight.
It's cool because it's not. There was no sense of like nerdishness or history or criticism or. he was just like, this is just fun, you know?
I like what I like.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a certain kind of innocence with that or something that, like, as music nerds, you don't get to feel. Like, I feel like we overthink everything so much of, like, what does me liking this mean about myself or the culture or whatever? And it's nice to just be like, I listen to everything except country.
Yeah. He was funny because he and, like, his friends, I think, really reflected, like, I would be at so many firefighter parties, and it's just like, oh, this is what music is for. Everybody gets drunk and like dances with their date, you know?
I've heard this song on the radio before.
Totally.
Let's have fun.
Yeah, and I guess that's like kind of the blue collar element too. I don't like to play too much into that, but you know.
Well, because I'll tell you, the quickest way to make a party boring is to give the auxiliary cord to a music nerd.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, let me put you up on this rare Elvis Costello B-side from Japan. Like,
totally.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is he also gave me a bunch of Elvis Costello records. So he's like a mystery where I was like, what did you like, Dad? Like, I'm still trying to figure out. He's alive, but I you know, I'm like, what was going on in 1981 where you bought all the rock pile and Elvis Costello stuff?
Let me tell you what was going on in 81. Cocaine.
Yeah.
And your mom, you said she was working in LA. What was she doing?
She worked for a pharmaceutical company that made glaucoma stuff. Like
weed.
She was a rep. Yeah, pre-weed.
Yeah.
Before they could really just lean on the weed stuff.
Yeah.
I remember she was going to school pre-med, but she didn't finish and got a job with this company called Upjohn that invented Rogaine.
Okay.
But she just happened to like really be into the eye stuff. So her deal for years was like she'd go to see an eye surgeon and talk to them about this drop that would like help them when they were doing cataract surgery.
Right.
And what was funny was like all her territories were like South Central, East LA, like not the glamorous LA.
Right.
And she was really cool. She was like one of the first female employees like that were doing field sales for them.
Okay.
And I think that she kind of fell into it as like a really pragmatic gig. Like she and my dad kind of had me pretty young, and they were like a new married couple, and it seemed like a really good job for her to provide for a family. And I mean, our household would start at 5 a.m. and she would get home from work at 8, and then my dad would be at the station overnight. So sometimes it was like I had dad like 2 days a week, and I had mom. So I spent a lot of time at the YMCA. That was like the first kid dropped at the YMCA in the morning, and the last kid picked up.
I had a very similar thing. We had like the youth center, and that's where we went after school. I was on an Air Force base, so we didn't have like YMCA, but it was like dances at the youth center, after school programs at the youth center, because parents working long hours.
Yeah, totally.
That's what it was to get by. When you say that you felt like an LA family, were you going to LA a lot as a kid, like seeing the sights, doing the things? Yeah,
I would like, you know, my mom would let me ride along with her sometimes, which were like the exciting days when I would like really like bug her to let me go. We had like a subscription to the LA Times. I think that's a big thing where...
Yeah, if you read the local paper, you feel like a
local. And like, we would be up there like for cultural stuff. My mom was like, she was highly supportive of the fact that at an early age I was exhibiting like curiosity. So a lot of books, a lot of museum trips.
Only child?
I have a younger sister.
Younger sister. How much younger?
4.
Okay, yeah.
So I actually started reading really early. So it was cool because I think that she sensed that I wanted to like be around something a little more than the beach.
Right. And she was able to kind of hone that curiosity rather than be like, yo, you're annoying.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And, you know, when you have a kid who wants to read and you're both really busy parents, that's an easy babysitter.
Yeah, totally.
I would be at so many like doctor's offices and it'd just be like, here's Swiss Family Robinson, go sit over there for a long time.
I was kind of similar in that sense where I was an early reader and they would just give me books to entertain myself. But I think also you're probably similar to me where we were at that age where we were right at the birth of MTV.
Totally.
And
yes.
so it's like that kind of gives us this outlier thing too, where music could be pumped into the household so viscerally and so easily, not just with radio, but now you could see it. And I'm sure that probably affected you a lot. Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. That was like that and radio. Like I was like little Rain Man. Like I memorized everything that was on like K-Rock and Power 106 and K-Earth and KLOS and MTV between 1990 and 95.
Yeah.
And I was just drinking it in, you know, and like that was cool because again, that's another thing where I was being exposed to a lot of stuff that like, you know, it's not obvious that influenced me, but like that shapes your brain a little bit. And it was a little bit more about music and the performative aspects of music than like now when you turn it on and it's reality TV.
Geographically, were you close to the beach? Like, were you a beach kid?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a bike ride away.
Okay, yeah.
We didn't... What's really funny, too, about the Orange County thing is that people, especially in the last, like, decade or two, have, like, a particular vision of it, which I think they see in their mind's eye, like Laguna Beach.
You're right.
And Huntington is much more just, like, low-slung, mid-60s ranch, like standard single family homes.
Right.
And in Huntington especially, it's like kind of the least glamorous that goes up to a waterfront. Also because we have the wetlands like by regulation between the beach and residential.
Yeah.
So you can like leave my folks' house and you don't see the beach, but you can smell it, and then it's flat and maybe 10 blocks and then you're there.
And I think it's one of those things where when you kind of live close to the beach, if it's not like 100% your thing, you can almost go like, it's too much effort to get down there.
Dude, that's exactly how I feel.
You know?
As I got older, that's how I felt.
Yeah.
But so I was really, really a beach kid because all the firemen would do, it was all like nature stuff. So like sailing, surfing, motorcycle riding, you know, like all those dudes would also have like co-op small boats, not yachts.
Right.
And they were all like, you know, again, rugged sailors. Like, so it was a lot of water stuff. But by the time I was like 14 or 15, you know, that's when I was like getting angsty and I grew my hair long and I was like, I'm not going to the beach anymore.
Well, it's interesting though because a lot of your music has that kind of old Dick Dale surf rock feel, you know what I mean? Like it's got that old surf movie vibe to it, some of it, you know?
Yeah.
And so you can feel that beach influence even if you weren't like a body glove wearing kid, you know what I'm saying?
It's weird too because like I feel so much of like what I do is like it doesn't just belong to one person. So a lot of like when it's like I had it there, it's so much a part of me. I get this like this thing activates in my brain when I'm close to, like this happened to me in Barcelona where I started tripping out the first time I was there, and I'm just like, I know that we're near the water. I can feel it. Like, and it's like it's ingrained in you, but it doesn't mean that you have to be like, oh, dude, I'm like from
Shaka bra.
It's not a Shaka lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it's I feel like that about everything. I guess with the surf music stuff, surf bands are it's a really awesome like moment in American music, and it makes a lot of sense if you put it in the context of like, I guess I live the same life to an extent that the guys who are making that did, which is Dick Dale and all those cats were like listening to really great rhythm and blues based bands, but then if they live in a certain place, it gets mutated to feel a certain way.
Right.
And like, I don't know, like you could get really deep and be like the curling of the waves in the gentle way that's how you want to make a note. I don't know.
Right.
I do notice that some of the stuff that I do on guitar, and I play pretty unconsciously, like especially if I'm soloing, I'll be like, wow, I tend to do like languid, like I like stuff that like has it goes from something that's like visceral into like a long dragging thing, which sure, that's kind of like tide feeling, I guess. You know?
Totally. I feel like since it's one of the first things you brought up, that like working in a Virgin Megastore must have been like a moment, right? I always say like no matter how successful you get, you look back at your high school job and realize those are maybe the best years of my life. Tell me about those years living in a music epicenter.
My mom really wanted me to get a job at the Subway sandwich shop that was down the street.
That was like that was like pivotal. That was like prime Subway time.
That was prime
when
Subway
they would call
time.
them sandwich artists.
Yes, totally.
They were still cutting the submarine, like the U cut.
Yeah, she really wanted me to get that job when I was 15, and I lobbied. I did that thing where you're like, I'm going to take the bus because I didn't have a car.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to take the bus every day. I can ride my bike if I leave early. I'm going to make, and I was like, that was when I got proactive about like, because my parents were also, they were not very Midwestern because they're just like, there's no downtime.
Right.
Boring people are boring. No laziness, no sleeping in. I never slept in, and so it was like, I was absolutely not going to, if my high school job was going to happen, I was like, man, I'm going to go here. Like, I didn't even think I was going to get the job. And I walked in and I remember the manager was just like blown away by how, this kid was like so certain. And I was,
right.
and he was like, what are your favorite records? And I just remember being like, talking about, like the first Stones records. And, I'm like, I just found out about the Small Faces, about them. Booker T and the MGs is probably my favorite band because they play on most records that I really love. And I wrote my eighth grade.
Like, but how do you feel about Britney Spears?
Yeah. And it was such a cool. So what was happening, I realized after getting that job there, is that was right when Virgin was starting to decline. And they were abandoning, especially the Costa Mesa, like corporate wasn't even dealing with them anymore because it was a double-decker store
right.
that was opened in like the prime booming Clinton economy.
Yeah.
And then by 2001, they're like, we're shutting off the top floor. We're laying off some people. And corporate doesn't need to come here anymore because you guys don't even make enough money for us to justify. So it was really up to the manager. And I think I was kind of novel to them. I was like a little Dalmatian. And I will say, from being around the fire station as a kid, like I was exposed to a lot of adult mentality. Mm. I mean, I also saw a couple things that were like kind of nuts where I'd be taken on a call by like my dad's friend. And I'm like, cool, that guy's ODing. I don't know. Yeah. Nah. So I knew how to talk to adults. Mm-hmm. And I think that also made me like, beyond precocious, a little bit more mature for my age. Mm-hmm. But I was like 5'4" and 95 pounds, and I had a Beatle haircut. Mm-hmm. So of course they want to get that kid in there.
Right. You're like a walking movie character.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. A lot of people compared me to the kid from Almost Famous because that had just come out.
Okay.
So being there, I just spent all my paychecks on buying product.
Those Tuesdays when the records would come out, I'm sure. And you probably got some good promo materials.
Tons of promo stuff.
Yeah.
Tons of promo stuff. And the reason I liked Virgin is they were an import. They had tons of imports.
Yeah.
And what I learned really early on was that like Ace Records is one of the greatest reissue labels in the world. They're an import. You could only get them there and some of it at Tower. But it was cheaper at Virgin because they were a UK company, so they had some deal. Mm. And all the music magazines were there. So I was just like, that was like going to college at age 15, 16. Mm-hmm. And then, being a teenager, like all I did was play in a band and work at the Virgin Megastore, and I ran cross country. And all of those are like, could be inherently lonely things. They're like lonerish things, but actually it was like, that was the community I was in.
Yeah, the combination of those three gave you a social life.
Yeah, and all those people, there's there's like a type of person who's there. So at the time I didn't understand it, but it was cool. It was like a great thing to have. And what's crazy is like out of that, there's the guy who's in the successful local band that all my coworkers were like 24 to 30.
Right.
And I wasn't even clocking a lot of the stuff that was like, who's doing smack? Like, who's sleeping with each other? Like, I didn't know about that at the time, but I was just like, cool, I'm going to go hang out with you guys till my curfew at 9:30. And then like the next day I'd be at work and everybody's like hungover. And I'm just like, what happened later, guys?
Right. That's too funny.
It was cool, man. It was really good.
You started a band at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a band from 14.
And were you always the lead?
No.
Okay, what were you doing?
No. The very first band, I got to play tambourine and sing. It was a band where there were two really good guitar players, so I was like the backbench third guitarist.
Yeah, in case somebody's string broke, you might come in.
Or if somebody was sick, I was allowed to,
Yeah.
But when I was in that band, I was like, okay, I'm going to be this. I'll be part of the band. And I needed to learn about band dynamics. And what I learned in that time period was that I got to start my own band.
Yeah.
Because if I want to ever make any decisions, it has to be like, if you have a vision. I just learned a lot about like intra-band politics by being there.
There's a lot of egos to deal with.
Dude, absolutely. And like, that was a hilarious band where there was like the one guy who wore like ripped jeans and no shirt and a leather vest and wasn't that great a guitarist, but was like a shredder.
Yeah.
And then the other guy who ended up being my best friend, who like we still collaborate today, was the best musician of anyone I met in all my teenage years, but he would like tolerate this other dude, so they were sort of.
He just kind of dressed normal, or
he was he looked like Kevin Arnold from Wonder Years.
Yeah, like he didn't need to present rock and roll because he like lived it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that band was kind of just a really funny teenage garage band, and what we did was play a lot of bad shows. Like you gotta do that. You gotta play a lot of bad shows. It was like a cover band, or that was what was cool. It was mostly originals.
Yeah, right.
We would cover like. By consensus, we would pick a song. So we were doing like Devo covers, CCR covers. What were the other ones? It was like a proto garage band, And then
could anybody actually sing like John Fogerty in that band, or what?
No,
I feel like covering CCR got to be tough.
Bold,
yeah.
And that was kind of when things were starting to shift towards me having to sing, because I remember that was the other thing of being in high school. So after that, there were like two other fragmentary bands with members of that, where like I was slowly ascending to power.
Yeah.
And that was always the big thing in being in high school bands, is like, all right, we could kind of get the arrangement together, but can anybody actually sing?
Do you think you treat your singing the way you treat your guitar playing, where it's like utilitarian to an extent? Like, in listening to your records, I can tell that singing is something you had to work on, didn't come naturally to you, but at the same time, you have found kind of your growl and your tone where you can make it work and get across the emotion you're trying to get to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure that sounded like a backhanded compliment, but...
No, dude. Yeah. That's where I live.
Okay.
I live in that backhanded compliment. My whole life is like... And that's also like cool to me, because that's what being like I'm like a working musician,
right.
Like it's like
you got to get it done. Like,
it's like being like a honky tonk band. Yeah. I don't have fantasies about playing a stadium. I don't want to be in front of thousands of people. Like, what I learned, especially as a teenager and also around the Fire Guy stuff, was like, sometimes like a song is much bigger than anybody involved, and that's what makes it cool. And like, probably that's what I heard in the early Stone. Like, I love the early Stones records because they suck. Yeah. Like, they kind of suck.
Right.
And that's what's cool about them. And so, yeah, that was the thing where
they're clearly just like paying homage to what they listened to and loved. You know what I mean? Like, I love the story about the Stones meeting Muddy Waters the first time and like being fucking blown away and like fanning out, like, because that's what they were. They were like a Muddy Waters cover band.
Absolutely.
When they started,
Yeah. And, that's what, I mean, I kind of, on a broader, like, philosophical scale, that's where my thing has been rooted since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Which, again, is like, all right, I got to figure out how to deliver this. It's all utilitarian. Yeah. It's all in service of the song, or, like, making the band work, or making whatever it is work.
Right.
And then eventually I'm like, well, that's just, that's my voice.
Yeah.
I'm stuck with this. I'm not going to be anybody else. I'll work on somebody else's stuff, but I I'm not suddenly going to have like gospel chops.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. At what point, or was there a breakthrough where kind of like the whole aesthetic came together between the time of being in like this kind of pseudo cover band / original band in high school to like being Nick Waterhouse, the retro rocker? You know, was there a breakthrough moment?
Yeah, it was kind of like a stepping stone thing, because after that, the last year of my high school stuff, most of that group of musicians coalesced into this band that we were in, where we were playing like 2 shows a week, and we made a record at the studio I would later make my first album at. And I started hanging around that studio a lot. So it was a good thing that it didn't happen. So it's kind of like, it's funny. It makes me think of like those funny like Bruce Springsteen Vietnam stories that he tells between songs on his live album, where he's like, and then Jimmy grew his hair out and he had to go to Vietnam and our band didn't go, you know?
Yeah.
Like the band we were in, we were starting to like feel like we could do it for real. And then 2 of my band members were like, hey man, I got a scholarship and my mom's a single mom and we don't have any money and I'm going to college. And so,
did you forego college?
No, but I went to state. I just went to San Francisco State.
Yeah.
And as soon as that started happening, I was like, I was not mad, but I was very disappointed, because it was almost this thing where I was like, we're here now. We can play shows and a lot of people will come. And
but that's the awakening too, where you kind of realize like you're the one who was really in it. Like you were the lifer.
That's what I mean. And that was the birth of like, I'm like, all right, if I ever do anything again, it'll just be me.
Yeah.
And then I took a long time like not playing. I mean, I would keep playing music and I messed around a lot in San Francisco, but there was never like any project that I was really excited about or that had any momentum. And, you know,
was that your first time moving away from home?
Yeah.
And how was it like as an experience? Did you like it? Did you get homesick?
No, it was, I wanted out. Yeah. Like I like,
as soon as you could, you wanted to get away from
it. Yeah. And, you know, the city was like, that was an interesting time in San Francisco because the first tech bubble had burst. So like,
the .com bubble.
The .com bubble burst, and there wasn't tons of money, and it was kind of like, it wasn't depressed, but there were still like a few seedy elements happening up there. And
yeah, you could get rent for cheap in San Francisco, like not more than a decade and a half ago, really.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that was when I showed up, and so there was this big feeling of like general optimism in it was almost like a resurgence of this like Bohemian days are here again. Like all these people that I met who were older than me were like, man, I'm so glad all these computer guys are like dead broke and moving away with their tail between their legs.
Right. I mean, there was like a big resurgence of skate culture up there. There's like a lot of punk kids living up there.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there was kind of this exodus of Southern California people.
Yeah.
Like Ty Segall moved up there a year after me, and there was like a big kind of like garage rock scene there, and a lot of warehouse shows, and like it was really vibrant, and it was exactly what I inherently knew I wanted, which was like a more diverse environment. Mm-hmm. And the action and like activity and the just being around like people who took art and music and culture really seriously in a way that like businesses and communities were built around them. That was different than being in Orange County. There were people who believed in that stuff, but it's almost like this fragmentary small thing. And when you got up there, you're like, oh, my home, you know? And there were not many bros to throw beer bottles at me from their trucks.
Right.
So it was great. And there was a great scene. Like a lot of my peers I'm still friends with, like Matt from the All Laws and I met first week of college. And wow. My friend Robbie Simon, who's a big artist, went up there.
And so did you get a group together up there and start playing shows?
Yeah, I kind of did. It was like, well, that's actually how Matt ended up playing music. I was like, you're going to play tambourine. Oh, it was like I was starting the thing over again.
You look cool. Can you play the tambourine?
Yeah, totally.
Somebody
Yeah.
invite me to play the tambourine in a fucking band already, goddammit.
There were like little projects, but I was also going through this thing where I was like, I don't think music is a viable sort of like
Career,
part of me
living.
Yeah, and part of me was like, there were people who were doing things really well in San Francisco in their own ways that I was like, I'm not going to try to horn in on this. And I mean, I was going to San Francisco State for literature, so I was starting to get this thing where I'm like, maybe I'll just be a teacher, like be a high school teacher.
Are you still a voracious reader?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as you can see, I'm...
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. I just turned around and he's got a wall full of books.
It's like, I think I actually learned a lot philosophically just from getting into that world, because the way that writers and sort of academics in the literary world interact with history and with context, it's just a little more thoughtful, and they're more advanced than us music people because they had longer. They're like 200 years ahead of us.
Right.
And I think that it's really significant because it's like a model for, like how you process your influences and how you digest and how you can be more thoughtful just in what you do.
So at this point of your life, were you, okay, I'm a literature student, maybe I'll become a teacher, write the great American novel type of thing? Was that the big dream then?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then maybe you'll just like...
Or nonfiction. Like I was, at the time, journalism seemed like a good idea.
Okay, yeah.
But that quickly, like, it was a pretty... I mean, the birth of me is so tied to sort of moving through this like post 9/11 tech boom era, and it culminates with the massive financial crisis in 2008, because that absolutely ruptured like what normalcy was going to be, I think, for everybody.
Right. Well, so similarly for me, I was going to photo school, right? And at the time, or when I first got into photography, it was that same thing where I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a photojournalist, right? But you kind of see this path of the death of journalism and going like, oh, wait, being a photojournalist doesn't seem like a real viable option for a living.
Yeah.
But then also that same crash that you're talking about affected every creative industry, whether it was writing or photography or whatever.
Yep.
And it's strange how you were trying to fight your instincts for the music, but it pulls you back in, because it's the same thing with me. Like, I'm not a working musician, but I still stayed in this thing where like I was trying to kind of like go straight and get a viable job, like not a pipe dream job. And still the music was like, nah, come back. You're not done yet.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. That was my thing. And what was going on while I was going to college was I was like hanging out at Rookies, this record shop that I worked at. And being around Rookies, and also like being in the city at the time, there were all these really great like underground DJ night dance parties. And that is where I felt even more like at home than being in a band and being a teenager and working at the Virgin Megastore. And, you know, all the loneliness that I talked about with being a runner and playing in a teenage garage band, like all that shit is where you're like, wow, I interact with 20 people. But when you are in a metropolis that has like a nightlife that feels like it has a pulse and is moving and breathing, and then there's hundreds of people that are coming in and out of these nights, and like you're suddenly interacting with like international, like somebody who's here from Germany or somebody who's here from Japan that like has a great record collection, loves all the stuff you do. And you see the smaller community that is around something like Rookies. That's where you feel like, okay, I belong here.
Yeah.
And that was something that was like really, really, really a massive influence on me and helped me understand like the dreamland and the world of imagination when you're alone and you're listening to music all the time can be real, but you have to let it be the thing it is. I think that that's kind of my response to like any criticisms that I live in another time. I'm not really making records for an Imagine like 1961. it's like for San Francisco in 2007 and 8 when I was like seeing hundreds of people like dig records.
When you felt like a part of a community.
Yeah.
How long do you stay in San Francisco before you migrate back down here?
Well, I made the first 45 when I was living in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I made it down here in Costa Mesa.
Yeah.
Back at the studio I grew up in. And it was this thing where I just did it on a whim, like in a weekend. Pick a band, friends, just like I was just hanging out at the studio. Like whenever I would come home at like Thanksgiving or something, I'd drop in and be like, "What's up, Mike? What are you working on?"
Is this like 2011, 2012?
This is 2010.
2010, okay.
Yeah. And we cut 2 songs in a day. And then I came back to San Francisco and I was like talking to a bunch of my friends from the kind of from my world of DJing. And I was like, I made this song, like, I think it's pretty cool. And everybody I played it for was like, this rips, you know?
Who was part of your DJ community up there? Like anybody?
Yeah, well, it's all San Francisco people. So it's like, you know, there's this guy named Tony Abrego who's out in New York now, and Primo Patino.
Okay, yeah.
The Soul Night party guys, they ran this Elbow Room night for like 15 years. You know, and there were just other friends that were like this guy, Jeff, who ended up playing drums for me eventually.
The reason I'm asking, I guess, is because, and I could be totally off base. So Innovative Leisure is an offshoot of Stone's Throw, right?
Yeah.
Stone's Throw at that time had like the Mayor Hawthorne thing going on, and that was DJ Haircut previously. Had you run into him previously or prior?
No, because those guys were all
LA based?
Groove Merchant guys.
Okay.
So there was like this distinct, it's not like, how do I explain it politely? There was a community of more funk collectors.
Okay.
Like break collectors.
Yeah.
Sample heads.
Yeah.
And then this thing that excited me in San Francisco was this group of people who weren't from a hip hop background listening to 45s.
Like spinning rare 45s. Carrying vinyl.
Yes.
Yeah.
That were not, because I always knew a lot of these. Like I also would like, when I was a teenager, I'd sneak into like the Goodfoot in Long Beach or like come up to Funky Soul in LA. And it was this thing where I love that stuff, but I'm like, I get the entry point for this. But the entry point that was going on in San Francisco with all these other people, it was cool because it was some people who were like Latin record collectors who were then buying like soul, like it almost was Northern Soul, but it wasn't that thing.
Yeah.
And I liked that because it was like a punk rock version of Northern Soul where nobody was doing the rules that like old British people had assigned to how you play 45s.
Right.
It wasn't exactly genrefied. And then like I love and treasure the Groove Merchant thing, but the Groove Merchant thing was so tied to the 90s sort of like Qbert, Digger, DJ Shadow, like Nicky's acid jazz funk world that all their records were geared towards the ears for those people.
Right.
And for somebody like me who grew up playing early Stones records, when you heard like an Otis Rush or a Robert Parker tune played in a club.
I get it. Like, I think what you're saying is like you guys were digging old records that would appeal to like rock and roll heads, and they're digging soul records. Like, even though they might be from the same era, they have that entry point of like, oh, I grew up listening to fucking Wu-Tang or whatever.
Totally.
And like, this makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I get that because even when you're saying it, I'm like, I know in my heart of hearts, I would have been like, oh, Groove Merchants. I get it. This is my shit. Because I could probably dance easier to that than I could to like what you guys were spinning, but I get it. There's probably a scene of kids that were outsider rock kids that were up there fucking dancing to that too.
Totally, yeah. And what was cool was the spread in the scene that I'm talking about was like much more like gender balanced. So there were a lot of like women that were involved in it, like much more than some of the like Digger funk nights where it's all heads like nodding along.
Underground like Digger hip hop shows. It's like there's no chicks there.
Staring dudes.
Yeah, of course.
And that was, again, I'm like 20 years old. Yes, I want to go with my friends and like dance and meet tons of people.
And is it something where in the scene you're talking about people are dressing kind of throwback rock? Like, is it like rockabilly or is it like
that was
old,
what
like,
was cool is that it was anti-rockabilly too.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean.
Like everyone wasn't dressing like Richie Valens or something.
If you took a photo, it looked like like an art school class.
Okay.
So, and I guess that's what appealed to me, because it wasn't oldies.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like top 40 Miracles Shop Around. It wasn't for hip hop heads.
Yeah.
It wasn't for weird British guys who are like, "Oh, mate, the BPM's off for the Northern hit," you know?
Yeah.
It was just like a real party that a peer group of people from all kinds of like diverse backgrounds who might be at a rock and roll show would go instead to this like dance party.
Nice. That's tight.
Yeah, it was cool. It was just like a really cool time, and it was also like pre-social media.
Yeah.
So it was in that sweet spot where like nobody was taking pictures of everybody all the time.
Right.
There were way less distractions, and it just had like an energy. I don't know.
And so after you press that 45, what starts happening for you?
Those DJs started playing it.
Yeah.
And then other DJs from out of town heard these DJs playing it, and then they started playing it. And then the next thing I know, like within 3 months, like dudes in like Spain and Germany are dropping my record in sets with like, it was like
with like genuine old school rock type shit.
Well, genuinely like $500 rare R&B records,
wow,
and then my record would be the next in a playlist.
Wow, that's cool.
And I think that created this kind of like, again, it's like if everybody's looking at you, suddenly people who were, I used to just be the kid who worked at the shop or something. All of a sudden people are like, "You gonna play a show?" And there was this weird confluence of about a month where it was very ragtag, and a bunch of people that I knew from the shop or like from college were like, "Dude, you should put a band together. I can play drums. I have a practice space. I can play bass for you." And it created this like really fast snowball effect where the first show I played was actually at like the best DJ night in the city at the Knockout.
Yeah.
And it was like within 3 months, I'm like, all right, I'm performing, like I have a set. And I didn't realize when I was doing all this college stuff, like I had been writing songs. It was just that I needed a band. And because as soon as I got the band, I was like, bang, 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 bang. Yeah.
So you never had any formal music training other than the lessons, like you like.
Nope.
I was honestly coming in here expecting you to be like, "Oh yeah, you know, I went to Thornton and like ran into all these guys. I went to Hamilton High," but nah, it really is kind of like this. You just figured it out.
Very scrappy.
Yeah, figured it out.
It's always been super scrap. What I find funny too is that like apparently I come off as like meticulous and scholarly, but like my approach is actually really rooted in just being like, all right, let's feel it out until it feels good.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not coming in with pages of charts for people. I'll have ideas and I'll ask people to play stuff, but...
Do people reach out to you to produce their records a lot?
Yeah, a fair amount. I mean, I think some people don't get what it is I'm doing.
Have you, not maybe amassed a collection, but have you started to like really figure out a lot of old analog recording equipment? Is that part of your process?
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it sounds so genuine, so I figure you must be using old tubes and everything.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and like I said, my process is just addressing a problem at a time. So if something didn't sound right, there was not a time where I was just going to be like, okay, well, fuck it. Let's just use this microphone anyways. I'd be like, well, let's try to move it. Let's move it again. Let's try it through something else. Let's try it. Okay, let's make a mental note that I liked that I did that. So then I just do it that way after.
Okay.
And I learned a lot of that from Mike, who owned the studio, the distillery where I made my first record.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, it's like the record. You start with this core of something, and then the electrons start orbiting around it, and it becomes something bigger. Because then people are learning like what I want, and I'm asking for more of that. But yeah, I have a fair amount of gear, but I'm also like, I'm like a gypsy, man. I just have a storage unit with like some stuff. I don't have a studio. I don't have a grip of gear. I don't have like Aladdin's cave, and it's just stuff to get the job done.
Right.
Yeah.
So being that, like, we keep saying this word utilitarian, but like being that you are like a working musician, you know, there are lapses between the records. You take your time. There are a few years between each one. What's life like between records? Because right now, this year, you just released a record, and I know you're going to do like the year-long record thing where it's like you got to do the press, you do the PR, you do the tour, you know, and then, but how do you stay afloat in those times when you're back in the studio working? Like, what's life like then?
I'm barely floating.
Yeah. I mean, I get it.
This whole thing was really insane because, like I said, I made the 45.
Yeah.
Within a couple months, I had a band. Within 3 months, I was playing my first show.
Yeah.
Then the next year, I'm doing nothing but like playing shows pretty much weekly. And then I kind of unintentionally quit my day job, got fired.
Yeah.
Because I took too much time off. Of course. And I didn't have I gave up my apartment. So all of this has just been a series of like giving up certain things to do other things and trading, and kind of like jumping from iceberg to iceberg. Like I haven't had any stability now for 8 years. I like moved down to LA, kind of on a whim. And I got, like, we were getting signed, and I was trying to leverage, like, putting out an album and trying to get my whole band on tour. And then we were just touring. And ever since then, it felt really relentless.
Yeah.
And, like, this thing happened in 2015 where I have a big band.
Yeah.
And
yeah, your shows are legit big band, like at least like what, 8 or 9 pieces?
8 or 9, yeah. And my business management at the end of that, like everything seemed to be going okay. Yeah. And then at the end of that year, they're like, "Hey, we're dropping you, and by the way, you owe $90,000 in taxes."
Oh my God.
And so then I was just like, cool, I guess I'm getting rid of my apartment.
Oh my God.
And I just kind of like floated for a while. It was not, so again, it's not like, and I don't have like a safety net or anything. Like nobody's supporting me. But I just was kind of like, all right, like
this too shall pass.
Yeah. I'll figure out another way to do it.
Okay, so let's get real here. How is that for mental health? Like, what does that do to you? Do you spiral a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I will say on a much smaller scale, I put out a record and got in trouble with the IRS too. Now, I only owed about 1/10 of that, but still, when you're trying to float paycheck to paycheck and you hear like, oh, by the way, you owe the IRS fucking 13 grand or whatever, you're like, oh, fuck. So like 90, like, well, that seems like an imaginary number. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, you start feeling like a hunted man. Like you get in this thing where, well, like I already, it just, all of it has felt unreal to me. And the logic of the industry still doesn't make sense to me. A lot of people, like a lot of friends become enemies and enemies become friends, and
that's what they don't tell you about being a musician, is that it's as much of it being a politician as well, and maintaining relationships. And that's hard when you're in an industry full of creatives and full of egos.
Yeah. But the other side of it is that I've just been like bearing witness to all these crazy kind of like shifts in the business. So again, for somebody who's like perceived as a highly retro guy, like I feel like very up on what the future of everything is. And the way that like conventional wisdom seems to change every 3 months. Like the funniest thing for me is constantly being told the last couple years how like all the money's in touring, and all I've ever done is paid to tour. Like I've spent every money.
The money's in touring if you're a one-man act.
Yeah,
if you're
totally.
a 9-man act, it's like, where does that money go?
And so, I mean, I'm going out on a tour for this album right now that I'm not making any profit. I've never made profit on a tour.
Yeah.
Just flat out, that's what it is. Yeah. And I accept that because I want to give people that want to see me like what I think is the real thing. And the times I've been in like big fights where I've had to go out on tour with like a 4-piece or something.
Yeah. But that's hard too, because like in the social media era, you know, people like you that take your time and are meticulous with their art, in the middle, you post an Instagram picture, people go, where the fuck's the new music at? Hey, where's the new music at? We want this. And it's like, bruh, like, how do I even stay afloat with this? Like, you're not like, I know that you like my music, but you alone are not paying my rent, you know? And I felt that, and it's hard to like, it's hard to get past that, you know? It's hard to find that inspiration.
Well, there's a lot of wants and desires that are like encouraged in consumers. And I also think the thing is that what the reality of what the business is that we're not really in the music business anymore. We may make music, but we make content.
You're the content business. And content is king.
And the content is the thing that creates capital for like everybody still running stuff. Mm-hmm. So my challenge has been like the same thing from the very beginning, which is how do I kind of like trick the system into allowing me to make, because when I'm maybe dead or maybe even in 15 years, like the thing that's going to matter way more to me is the record, and that somebody can have the experience that maybe I had when I was like 14, right, where you're hanging out and you're just like can't stop playing this record, and you look at everything on the record and you read it over and over again, and there's not a lot there, but you just want more.
The interesting thing about your records, right, and there's like kind of a whole subgenre of these type of records, right, where people will call them retro when they come out, but in the future they will say, oh, this is timeless, because it sounds like maybe it was of another era, right? So if somebody finds a Nick Waterhouse album that came out in 2019 in 2039, they might think it came out in 69, right?
Totally.
I think about it like that Durando record, right? Like that's like this fucking epic soul sample that so many people have used, and it's just like this beautiful song, and then you realize it didn't get released until like 99 or something, or 2005, I don't remember. Or like Lee Fields, you guys share a PR agency, and like
he's some band members.
There you go. So like he's another one where it's like if you put out these records, people will call it retro soul, but it's really just like this timeless music, because that era of music is really timeless, and it does speak to a lot of different age groups and a lot of different demographics, you know?
Yeah, I also think we need to, like in music especially, all of us, like critics and artists, need to come to a consensus about how are we going to treat history? Right. Because the inherent, like, scare tactic of calling something retro in music reduces it to a product immediately. Right. Because it makes, it flattens out, like, aesthetic choices. It makes an aesthetic choice, and it places it within a period of time. Mm-hmm. So, like, I mean, if you look at other stuff, like, if you look at Paul Gauguin, the painter, like, was his painting supposed to be retro, primitive? Right. Or was he like, what were the decisions that led to that? Like, barring influence, you know? So again, it just reduces it to making it really dumb. I mean, there's dumb shit that gets made that is just content that is like intentionally a pastiche. But if somebody puts a lot of thought into it and they're influenced by something, I don't think that means that it's like it's not existing now. So, you know, I mean, I write songs that are about my own experiences and the world around me, and I play the type of music that like I actually like to play. If I was playing music that was contemporary, like what does that sound like? Like what is contemporary? Right. Is it also, can everybody that makes music in 2019 make contemporary music?
Right. Well, speaking of putting feelings into records, tell me about this self-titled record. It's a lot of pressure to self-title a record. That means that's the one. That's you.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like it was the time. Yeah. It felt like the first 3 records were like practice, and I'm kind of just, if you self-title your 4th, you can just say, like, erase the first 3. Yeah. And if you were to engage with me in one record, like, this is probably it.
And that's the one where now you can tell people, like, oh, which one should I start with? Start with the one named after
Absolutely.
me. Yeah.
And in a couple years, people will be confused enough to think it's the first one.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, feels good, man. I played and sang as best as I could. Everybody's, like, playing the shit out of it. It's got like a good variety. Like I really like the atmosphere. Yeah. I'm really into like, again, I like to serve the songs and like the listening experience. It's not really about selling me. Yeah. So it's funny that I named it after myself. But maybe that speaks to that. Like The first record was like kind of wild and out of control, and the second was like highly controlled, and the third was somewhere in between with a lot of really good playing. So this one seems to have all that stuff in one.
Yeah. The single's great. Got
Thanks,
Danny
man.
Trejo in the video.
Yeah,
What's that like?
My boy. It was really cool. We did like an hour of improv together.
Really?
I'm trying to get Gilbert, the director, to
some outtakes.
Well, just put together like the actual talk show, because there's like a lot of really funny shit that was going down. That was just like Gilbert's Danny's son, and he's like a really good director.
Yeah.
And I've known them for like 2 years. My manager grew up with both of them in Venice.
Cool. Nice.
And he was like, "Man, we got to make a video. I have a couple ideas. If it's good, we'll get my dad in it." And then we started spitballing it, and he sent me this concept, and then I like kind of added a little touch of further cynicism to it.
Yeah.
We were talking about it, and I'm like, man, those interviews with like drunk Orson Welles in the mid 70s, or like Norman Mailer when they're in their sideburns period. Or like Van Morrison on coke.
Yeah, like you busted out the sideburns and the prosthetics and everything, huh?
And the high kick and the fat suit. Yeah,
it was something.
It was good. But yeah, Wreck the Rod, that song, it's kind of cool because I wrote that with my best friend who was in my very first band.
Nice.
He lives in Louisiana. He's a mathematician.
Wow.
So we write by iMessage. We send each other voice memos back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To like brainstorm.
Yeah.
Oh, this melody should go like
totally,
this.
Yeah. And he's more of a piano player, and I'm the guitarist, and then I tend to write the lyrics, and we'll come up with a vocal melody together. So
wow, mathematician. I didn't even know that was like a real career.
Yeah, he's he runs a lab for a college, but really all that stuff goes to the same place, which is either the U.S. military or the banking system.
That makes sense. Only two profit-turning things.
Yep.
Hey, man, I really enjoy the record. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
If you guys listening are interested, Nick Waterhouse, the artist and the album, are available on Spotify, iTunes, wherever the fuck you stream records at. Tidal, I'm sure, all of those places.
Or at your local record store.
Or at your local record store, which is probably where he wants you to go get it from. So, if you have a nice piece of hi-fi equipment sitting in your living room, throw that little slab of vinyl on there and get it popping. It's a good time, and it'll make you want to dance. But it's also just good music to put on in the background when you're doing whatever. Go check out the record. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. This was You Feel Me. Where can the people find you online real quick?
NickWaterhouse.com. Nick Waterhouse, all one word, on the Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff.
All that stuff. You can find him. It's very easy. All right. I appreciate it. This was
Thanks,
You Feel
man.
Me.